Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Top 10 players for this Alabama program heading into 2024. And Dill, similar to how we just talked about Michigan, I feel like a lot of people overlooking this Alabama program, obviously losing Nick Saban, losing a lot of NFL talent to the draft, that you start going through this top 10 team and say, or top 10 players of the team and say, this team's still damn talented. Heading into 2024, want to get into our top 10 players for this program. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. Massive shout out to the Alabama fans. Dill, showing a little love with the throwback Jerry Jeudy jersey on the wall. It's been a blast talking this program since Kalen DeBoer has taken over. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. One, if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, and for this Alabama team specifically, a lot of different ways you can stack these players. Would love to get some feedback from you guys. We'll chop it up in the comment section. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start with just giving some honorable mentions, if you will, guys that we kind of wanted to throw in the top 10, guys that quite frankly could be top 10 players for this Alabama program in 2024. And it starts off with one, true freshman Ryan Williams. Like, this kid, I get he reclassified to the 2024 cycle. He still just has that juice to be able to contribute year one. And then I look at a guy who was an early enrollee from modern day, Xavier Brown, and saying, this kid, we said it when he committed to Alabama out of high school, maybe not the ceiling that Jalen Mbakwe has in terms of top-end talent, but you talk about a polished-up cornerback prospect that I think could play day one in the SEC. I mean, Xavier Brown could be a massive role player for this Alabama team as well.
And frankly, two guys in thinner rooms in this Alabama team. So I think they're going to get their shot, especially Ryan Williams. I think you like some of the wide receivers. I am a big fan of Kendrick Law, but you still are wondering who's going to be that guy, who's going to be that one. And again, when you're a super talented young kid, especially at those cornerback, wide receiver, those positions that rely a little bit more on athleticism, rather than some of those line positions where it does feel like guys sometimes take a little longer to develop, I think these two both can have a huge impact on Alabama.
100%. In the transfer portal additions, one, Jeremy Bernard, like, not much to say there. We saw what he could do in the spring game, could potentially be wide receiver one for this Alabama program. And Dill, maybe one of the more intriguing players that you see across the country, Deontae Jackson, coming to Alabama. This kid coming out of high school was as good as it gets. Also a modern-day cornerback. Never really put it together at USC. I think a lot of the blame can go to that USC coaching staff on the defensive side of the football.
I was going to say, doesn't just every USC defensive player get a bit of a pass? Because I
was going to say, it wasn't just Deontae Jackson underachieving on that USC defense. So maybe change the scenery, maybe a little bit better coaching staff. Very good Alabama coaching staff on the defensive side of the football. This kid, if he achieves the height of his potential, you're looking at an all-conference cornerback in Deontae Jackson. But Dill, let's get into our top 10 players. In number 10, a guy that I don't think enough people talk about. I know you're a big Jaheim Otis fan, and you have a lot of potential game records on the inside of this Alabama defensive line. It's a position that Nick Saban has historically recruited very well. And I think a guy that just kind of flies under the radar is Tim Keenan. And again, 38 tackles for a guy that played a lot of nose for Alabama in 2023, extremely active along the line of scrimmage, good in the run game with that 6'2", 300 and almost 30-pound frame. But Dill, how many guys do you talk about from the nose position or from that interior defensive line position get after the quarterback like Tim Keenan? 15 quarterback hurries. This is a kid that I think can be a serious difference maker for Alabama in 2024.
And again, you kind of mentioned probably not the same potential that Jaheim Otis has. And if Jaheim Otis plays really well, I mean, we got to see it at some point. So again, probably our right to leave him off this list because it hasn't quite come together. But I think you're right. And when you watch Tim Keenan, I mean, that Michigan game, how disruptive he was. Michigan's trying to pull offensive line, and he's banging into everyone. He just, again, makes it really hard to run on the inside. And I think you're right, a little bit of an underrated pass rusher. Probably not going to have big sack numbers because he's not wildly explosive, but really powerful, can walk offensive linemen into the quarterback's lap, does a lot of things to disrupt the team. Again, not going to show up on the stat sheet because he is not a wildly explosive player, but so disruptive.
Let's get into number 9. And this is a little bit of a projection, but I don't think any Alabama fans are going to fight us on this one. Running back Justice Haynes. And this was a kid, again, going back to his days at Buford. I absolutely loved him. And he comes to Alabama, doesn't play as much as I think I expected him to play during his true freshman year. But when he did touch the field, he was extremely impressive. And you talk about a guy that was just college ready as a true freshman. That's Justice Haynes, right? It's average 6.7 yards per carry as a true freshman, 3.8 yards after contact per carry. I mean, this is a kid with a very thick lower half, can make people miss at the second level. Dill, you talk about a guy that, for people who don't follow the recruiting trail, maybe not heard of Justice Haynes because he didn't stand out as a true freshman. This kid's going to take a lot of people by storm in the 2024 season, in my opinion.
I thought you saw a really, really impressive spring game from him. You saw a little bit more explosion. Again, you saw the power, the physicality, the contact balance. You saw that in high school. You saw it for his runs last year in his sparing opportunities. But again, I thought you saw a little bit more get up, if you will, a little bit more explosiveness. And if he puts that into his game, he is really, really tough.
That Alabama running back room, you talk about another spring game standout, Jam Miller and Richard Young from Lehigh Acres. I mean, that's a young running back room that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. The Alabama running back room, that could be one of the better running back rooms that you see in the country in 2024, behind an offensive line that we'll talk about. A few of these cats can absolutely road grade. Going to number 8, talk about offensive lineman Kadyn Proctor. Now, I think a lot of people like to write Kadyn Proctor off because he did have some growing pains, especially early on in the season. And there was a big spotlight on this kid who was a 5-star coming out of high school. Dill, I think he needed an adjustment period to the SEC level play, right? Playing out in Iowa high school football is a hell of a lot different than playing in the SEC. And you saw some of those growing pains. Now, 2 things that I'd note. One, I think a lot of his problems had a lot more to do between the years than it did physically. I mean, just kind of late picking up blitzers, not necessarily always knowing his responsibility. But as you saw him move on during his freshman year, he got better and better. And Nick Saban wasn't trotting out Kadyn Proctor as a true freshman left tackle for no reason. They obviously really, really like this kid. I think he's going to take a massive step in 2024.
Probably still going to grow into his body a little bit. I mean, come in that big. I mean, what was he, 6'6", 350 pounds? That's a really, really big true freshman. Again, you started to see him dial it in. I mean, that Georgia game, very, very impressive. I thought him and Tyler Booker had an awesome game together, moving guys around, opening up big holes for their running backs. And he can obviously block in the run game, no doubt about that. Just has to get a little bit smoother, a little bit more polished than what he does in the pass game. And then you're looking at a first-round tackle. No doubt.
Yeah, I mean, he's got first-round talent written all over him, and you said it best. Talk about the most imposing left side of an offensive line that you'll see in all of college football. T-Book, Kadyn Proctor. Those guys could be a very dynamic duo for Alabama. Going to number 7, Keon Sabb, a guy that we know awfully well as Michigan fans. We said this when Keon Sabb committed to Alabama. Y'all got a good one here. This was a guy that started for Michigan in the national championship game against Washington. And although I think the narrative is he didn't play a lot for Michigan because he wasn't a quote-unquote starter through most of the year for Michigan, he played over 360 snaps. And Dill, whenever he touched the field, as Michigan fans, we always knew we had a good one. This one hurt to see him go to Alabama. I'm fired up for this kid to have some opportunity to really put it together. We're talking about a guy that could be a top 5 player for this Alabama program in 2024.
To really be able to plug into that deep safety role, because I think that's where he wants to be. That's where he wanted to be at Michigan. I think he's going to be really, really good. A position, obviously, I think Alabama did need to fill in the portal. And you get a guy who, again, it doesn't take much. Watch that national championship game against that really good passing attack of Washington. I mean, being able to jump routes, being able to cover in man, just having a really good sense of what he was doing, even for a guy who, as you kind of mentioned, wasn't really totally a first-team guy, wasn't taking first-team reps, but just you can tell there's a lot of savvy in his game, even more so than just the physical talent. I think he does combine that part really, really well, and he's going to be a really good player for Alabama.
You said it, holding up in man coverage. We don't say that for a lot of safeties. It's a very rare trait. Keon Sabb can do that, and that allows you as a defensive coordinator to do a lot of different things when you trust the safety to not get beat in man coverage. Moving up to number 6, that we're going to talk about Jihaad Campbell. And I think a lot of Alabama fans might be pissed at us because I think they might want Jihaad Campbell a little bit higher. We've been saying it all offseason. You look at Deontae Lawson, who we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. and Jihaad Campbell as arguably the best off-ball linebacker duo that you see in the country. Jihaad Campbell, third on the team in tackles last year. I mean, really kind of took over that starting role and didn't look back. You take a look at some of the numbers in depth, 8.5% missed tackle rate. This kid did not miss tackles. He can get after the passer. And I remember Jihaad Campbell coming out of high school as potentially being an edge rusher at the college level, and he kind of shows some of those traits. He shows why people thought he might be an edge rusher, can really get after the passer from that linebacker position. I think Jihaad Campbell, the more football this kid plays, is going to just get better and better at that off-ball backer spot.
Yeah, I thought that Kentucky game was kind of his coming out party. I thought he looked really good there. And then you kind of started to see, I mean, his ability to cover sideline to sideline, do a lot of things and be disruptive in the run game, especially. And you mentioned it, being versatile, can play the pass. I think, again, you probably maybe want to see a little bit more in pass coverage, be able to diagnose some of those plays, especially into the flat. And that's a really hard play, I think, to defend in the Nick Saban defense. But again, as he kind of gets better and better and gets more experience, there is no doubt about the athleticism. You constantly see that on the field. As he gets more to like that comfortability that Deontae Lawson kind of has, I think you're going to have a really
just like we talked about with Kadyn Proctor, I think the narrative with Jihaad Campbell is very similar. Like once it starts getting put together between the ears, like diagnosing things a little bit quicker, you're going to see a really special linebacker. Because again, both Deontae Lawson and Jihaad Campbell, from a physical trait standpoint, there's not a single box that's unchecked with both of those two cats. Going to number 5, Jalen Milroe. Potentially a little bit low on Jalen Milroe, but I think that more speaks to the 4 players that we're going to talk about in the next couple of minutes. Jalen Milroe pushing the ball down the field, I don't think people talked enough about it. I mean, his average depth to target was 13.4 yards down the field. That is by far the highest that I've seen from a quarterback that I've been looking into during this offseason. A 52% completion percentage, 20-plus yards down the field. He has one of the best deep balls that you saw in the country. But I thought the turning point for Jalen Milroe was letting him play his game. Like I feel like the first couple of games, they wanted Jalen Milroe to kind of play a certain way, and that just wasn't Jalen Milroe. And once they kind of let him loose, so to speak, and let him play, use his athleticism, get outside the pocket, play a little bit of backyard football. You're talking about one of the best athletes on the football field every single Saturday. Go let him use that athleticism. And I think Kalen DeBoer, I mean, a guy that we know can develop quarterbacks, but I think more importantly, knows how to put his guys in the right spots to be successful. I think you're going to see a step up from Jalen Milroe in terms of how Kalen DeBoer decides to use him in this Alabama offense.
In that LSU game, it's the game I turn on and say that's how they need him playing. Because, I mean, that's when you look comfortable running. You look very willing to run. I think they had good designs to it. He was handling the ball effectively. I mean, that's the type of game I look at. If he plays that way every game, that's such a hard offense to stop just because how explosive he is, how athletic he is. But also the fact that when he's doing that, I felt like the air game was pretty good too, where he was dialed in. I mean, they were opening things up. And I mean, that's the type of game I look at. That needs to be him every game, if that's him every game.
And not to like bang on a drum, but I don't get why they were so afraid to let him loose in the first place. Like, if you're worried about Jalen Milroe getting hurt, I'm more worried about the linebacker who's tackling him getting hurt than Jalen Milroe. I mean, this is a guy that's built to use his legs, use his athleticism. You got to be able to scheme to your players. And as they did that with Jalen Milroe, he got better and better. I think Kalen DeBoer is going to do the exact same thing. I'm fired up about this kid. They'll potentially Heisman Trophy winner. Let's just start that narrative now. Going to number 4, Jaeden Roberts. We got another interior offensive lineman to talk about with Alabama. I mean, Jaeden Roberts, when he took over that starting role, he did not look back. Solid in pass pro, got better in pass pro as the season went on. But the narrative with Jaeden Roberts is he's a road grader. I mean, he is so explosive off the line of scrimmage, effortlessly moves interior defensive lineman off the ball. You talk about Alabama running the football in 2024. Jaeden Roberts, Kadyn Proctor, a guy we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. You got some of the better run blockers that you see in the country on this Alabama offensive line.
Yeah, and I'll just cut right to the chase. When I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, can you arguably put Tyler Booker and Jaeden Roberts 1 and 2? Because I think when you started to see that Alabama team get rolling, it was on the backs of those two. And Jaeden Roberts finally was slotted into that offense. I mean, so dominant. You just said it, just the way they are blocking the run game, how good they are moving guys off the ball, getting up to linebackers, and just setting that floor of 4 yards minimum. And you obviously pop your couple of runs here and there. I mean, they just really started to dominate up front. I think him and Booker are the two leaders of that unit. And
you might be talking about two of the best interior offensive linemen in the country. I think Tyler Booker's my favorite interior offensive lineman in the country. When I'm talking about the number 2 interior offensive line in the country, Jaeden Roberts on that short list. And I kind of wonder, like, what is Kalen DeBoer going to think when he didn't have these kind of guys at Washington? I know Washington last year won the Joe Moore Award trophy. That had a lot more to do with how good their tackles were in pass protection and, quite frankly, how well Michael Penix got rid of the football and not giving up sacks. What's he going to do when he sees Tyler Booker and Jaeden Roberts on the inside? You got Kadyn Proctor left tackle and say, all right, now we can push the ball down the field, but I haven't had an offense like this that can move people off the line of scrimmage. I think
you saw in the spring game. I mean, you saw they're going to run a hard physical offense, especially in that run game. And why wouldn't you? I think Kalen DeBoer kind of said that same thing. He's like, sometimes when I was overmatched physically, I had to coach a little bit different. I mean, if you can run the power scheme the way Alabama should be able to at that interior offensive line, that's a little bit easier, frankly, than having to run some of the stuff he ran at Washington.
Going to number 3, Malachi Moore. And you talk about arguably the most impactful player coming back for Alabama on the defensive side of the football. It might be Malachi Moore because you're a little concerned about just being thin in the secondary. How great is it to have a guy in Malachi Moore that has played 2,300 snaps during his career at Alabama, going to be a 5th-year starter for Alabama, coming back? You talk about all this. I mean, we're young, we're inexperienced in the secondary. Well, Malachi Moore kind of answers some of those questions. And Dill, just the ultimate chess piece in this defense, a guy that could play the free safety spot, although I think we both like him more around the line of scrimmage, playing that box safety, potentially that nickel role, can hold up in man coverage, can be physical in the run game. That ultimate chess piece for this Alabama defense with a ton of experience, Malachi Moore coming in at number 3.
No arguments from me. I think what really stands out, I mean, again, obviously can play very effectively in man coverage, but his ability to get downhill on screens, beat blocks, make big plays. I mean, I'm kind of with you. I thought, like, part of me almost when I was watching back, I was like, why didn't this guy go to the draft? I think that's first round talent. I mean, that's Brian Branch. That's like the type of guys the NFL is looking for. Really nice to have him back because he was really good.
Number 2, Deontae Lawson. This has been our guy all year last year. And very similar how you talked about Jihaad Campbell. There's just not a box from the athletic profile that Deontae Lawson doesn't check. 35 run stops, led the team by over 10 run stops last year. This kid was everywhere for Alabama. Very similar to Jihaad Campbell. I think just a little bit more put together mentally than Jihaad Campbell. Deontae Lawson, one of the best backers in the country. And going to number 1, I think kind of the consensus number 1, if we were to pull any Alabama fan, I think Tyler Booker is the best player on this Alabama team. Road grader in the run game, damn good in pass protection, checks off a lot of boxes. Now, Dill, more importantly than diving into Tyler Booker, because we kind of already talked about him with this Alabama offensive line, this Alabama team has so many names that we didn't include in the top 10 that certainly could be top 10 players for this program. You talk about a bunch of wide receivers. We mentioned Jerby Bernard at the top. You talk about guys like Keon Keeley or a guy like Jan Zapier. There's a ton of young talent on this Alabama team that is, kind of just waiting to break out. So we check back in at this list in middle of October. There's so many names that really could be top 10 players for this Alabama team that we did not talk about over the last 20 minutes. And I mean, I would ask the Alabama fans to kind of call your shot in the comments section on guys that you think are going to break out. And Dill, we'll close it on this. If you were to name a guy that we didn't talk about over the last 18 minutes that you think breaks out for Alabama, who are you going with?
Going Kendrick Law. I think I kind of said it earlier. I just really like the way he can. I mean, watching him take those end arounds, I just want to see him more involved as a focal point in the pass game. And it was tough when you have guys like Isaiah Bond and Burton. Like, you had good wideouts, so I get why he maybe wasn't getting as much as maybe I thought he should have. But I think he can be really, really dynamic. I want to see him a bigger part of this.
And what does Kalen DeBoer specialize in? Getting his wide receivers in space, letting them operate after the catch. You saw a lot of Washington receivers have a lot of success doing that last year. Fired up for this team. Think it's a lot more talented than a lot of people appreciate, especially for people who follow the recruiting trail. They probably have a better appreciation for how good this team is. We'll cut it there again. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, again, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.